Jake Martinez stood in his small apartment in Detroit, watching the news with his 12-year-old daughter Lucy. The reporter spoke fast, her voice shaking as she described the massive ships that had appeared in the sky 3 days ago. The alien vessels were huge, made of some kind of crystal that sparkled in the sunlight, and they hung over every major city on Earth like dark clouds. "Dad, what's going to happen to us?" Lucy asked, moving closer to her father on the old couch. Jake put his arm around her and tried to smile, but inside he felt scared. He had been a Marine for 8 years before coming back to work at the auto factory, and he knew what war looked like. This was different, though. This was something no human had ever faced before. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrians. They were 8 feet tall with hard, shell-like skin that looked like armor. They had 4 arms and faces that reminded Jake of insects, but with large, bright eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. Their leader, Commander Vexthal, had spoken to the world's leaders through the television just yesterday. His voice was deep and cold, like metal scraping against stone. "Your planet now belongs to the Zephyrian Empire," he had said. "Surrender now, and your people will be treated fairly. Fight us, and your cities will burn." The world's military forces had tried to fight back, but it was hopeless. The alien weapons turned tanks into dust and made fighter jets fall from the sky like broken toys. In just 2 days, every major army on Earth had been defeated. The president had appeared on television that morning, tears in his eyes, to announce that humanity was surrendering. Jake's phone buzzed. It was his friend Tony Ritchie, who worked at the docks. "Jake, you need to see this. The aliens are setting up some kind of camp near the river. They're putting up buildings that look like they're made of glass." Jake looked at Lucy. "Stay here and keep the door locked. I'll be back soon." He drove through the empty streets of Detroit. Most people were staying inside, afraid to come out. The alien ships cast long shadows over the city, and Jake could see smaller craft moving between them like busy insects. When he reached the docks, he found Tony standing behind a pile of shipping containers, looking toward the river. "Look at that," Tony whispered, pointing to where the aliens were working. The Zephyrians moved in perfect formation, like dancers who had practiced the same routine 1,000 times. They were building structures that seemed to grow from the ground, made of the same crystal material as their ships. Jake watched as one of the aliens touched a metal pole, and instantly it began to change shape, becoming part of a larger building. "There, not just visiting," Jake said quietly. "They're planning to stay." Over the next few weeks, the aliens established control over every major city. They set up what they called processing centers, where humans had to register and receive identification cards. Jake had to go through the process himself, standing in a long line with hundreds of other people while Zephyrian soldiers watched them with those glowing eyes. The alien who processed Jake's paperwork was smaller than the others, with lighter, colored skin. He scanned Jake's body with a device that looked like a metal wand, then handed him a card with strange symbols on it. "You will work in manufacturing Sector 7, the alien said in English that sounded stiff and formal. "Report at dawn cycle each day. Failure to comply will result in punishment." Jake wanted to ask what kind of punishment, but the alien had already moved on to the next person in line. He walked away, clutching his identification card, feeling like he was holding a piece of his own defeat. The factory where Jake worked was now under alien control. The Zephyrians had installed new machines that were far more advanced than anything humans had built. They could make car parts in minutes that used to take hours. The alien supervisors watched the human workers carefully, making notes on tablet-like devices. But Jake noticed something strange. The aliens seemed confused by simple things that humans did without thinking. When old Pete from the assembly line offered to share his lunch with a young worker who had forgotten his food, the alien supervisor stared at them for a long time, tilting his head like a puzzled dog. Another time, Jake saw a woman named Mary help a fallen alien soldier who had tripped over some equipment. The soldier seemed shocked that she would help him, and he stared at her hand when she offered to help him up. He didn't take it, but he watched her walk away with something that looked almost like curiosity. Sarah Thompson, a paramedic who now worked in the alien medical facility, told Jake about similar incidents. They don't understand why we help each other, she said during one of their secret meetings in the old church basement. Yesterday, I treated a human child who had been injured in an accident. 3 Zephyrians stood there watching me work, and they kept asking each other questions in their language. It was like they'd never seen anyone care about a stranger before. Rick Chun, a software engineer who was now forced to work on alien computer systems, had noticed something else. Their technology is incredibly advanced, but it's all designed for one purpose: control. They don't have games, art, or music in their computers. It's all military data, resource management, and surveillance programs. As the weeks passed, Jake began to realize that the aliens were not just conquering Earth, they were studying it. They watched human behavior with the same intensity that scientists might observe laboratory animals. But something was happening that neither side had expected. The Zephyrians were changing. Jake first noticed it with the alien supervisor at his factory. The creature, who had been cold and efficient at first, began to linger near the human workers. He would watch them joke with each other during breaks, and sometimes Jake caught him making small movements with his head that almost looked like he was trying to nod along with their conversations. Commander Vexthul himself seemed different when he appeared on television for his weekly addresses. His voice was still cold, but there were moments when he paused, as if he was thinking about something that confused him. During his last broadcast, he had said something that struck Jake as odd. The human population continues to behave in ways that are unexpected. Lucy noticed it too. Dad, the aliens don't look as scary as they did before, she said one evening. The one who checks people at the corner store, he almost smiled at Mrs. Garcia yesterday. Jake didn't know what to make of it, but he was starting to suspect that the Zephyrians had made a serious mistake. They had come to Earth expecting to find a species they could easily control, but instead, they had found something they didn't understand. Humans who refused to stop being human. Even under occupation. The resistance was already forming in secret meetings and hidden messages. Jake had joined a group led by a former Army captain named Ben Torres. They met in different locations each week, planning small acts of sabotage and sharing information about alien movements. Jake was beginning to think that the real resistance might not be the one they were planning. It might be something much simpler and more powerful. The simple act of remaining human in a world that had been taken over by beings who had forgotten what it meant to be individuals. The Zephyrians had conquered Earth in days, but Jake was starting to wonder if they had any idea what they had actually captured. 6 months had passed since the Zephyrians arrived, and Sub-Commander Crickstall was having trouble sleeping. This was strange, because his species didn't normally need much rest. But lately, he found himself lying awake in his assigned quarters, thinking about things that made no sense to him. The human child was the beginning of his confusion. Her name was Emma Sullivan, and she was 8 years old with bright red hair and a smile that seemed to appear even when she was scared. Crickstall had been leading a patrol through the area humans called Central Park when he spotted her playing with 3 other children near a large tree. Children, disperse immediately, Crickstall had commanded, following the standard protocol for crowd control. The other children ran away, but Emma walked straight toward him instead. In her small hands, she held a piece of paper covered in colorful marks. I made this for you, she said, holding up the paper. Crickstow looked down at the drawing. It showed a tall figure with 4 arms standing next to a smaller figure with yellow hair. Both figures were holding hands, and there was a large yellow circle in the sky above them. At the bottom, in uneven letters, were the words, "Friends Forever." "What is this?" Crickstow asked, his voice softer than he intended. "It's you and me," Emma said. "I wanted to give it to you because you look sad." Crickstow felt something strange happen inside his chest. It was like a crack forming in ice, small at first, but growing larger. He had never experienced this sensation before, and it frightened him. A woman with the same red hair as the child came running toward them. "Emma, come away from there right now," the woman called. "It's okay, Mom," Emma said. "He's not mean. He's just lonely." The woman, who introduced herself as Lisa Sullivan, approached carefully. She looked at the drawing in Crickstow's hands, and then at her daughter. "I'm sorry if she bothered you. She's always making pictures for people." "Why?" Crickstow asked, genuinely confused. "What purpose does this serve?" Lisa tilted her head, studying his face. "She does it to make people happy, to show them that someone cares about them." That night, Crickstow sat in his quarters staring at the drawing. He had placed it on his desk, and he found himself looking at it repeatedly. The concept of making something simply to bring joy to another being was completely foreign to Zephyrian. Society, everything they did served the Empire, served the collective good. Individual pleasure or happiness was not considered important, but the more he looked at the drawing, the more he felt that strange sensation in his chest. It was warm and uncomfortable, but also somehow pleasant. He didn't understand it, but he didn't want it to stop. Similar incidents were happening across the occupied territories. In London, a Zephyrian technical officer named Dexmore had been assigned to monitor the electrical systems in a residential area. An elderly human named George Patterson had invited him in for tea during a routine inspection. "No need to stand." "They're in the rain, son," George had said, opening his door wide. "Come in and dry off. I'll put the kettle on." Dexmore had intended to refuse, but something about the old man's tone made him curious. He followed George into a small room filled with photographs and comfortable furniture. George moved slowly, his back bent with age, but he hummed quietly as he prepared the tea. "You have offspring?" Dexmore asked, pointing to one of the photographs. "Grandchildren," George said with a smile. "That's little Ben, he's 7. And that's Sarah, she's 5. They live in Wales with their parents, but they visit me every summer." George talked about his grandchildren for an hour, showing Dexmore pictures and telling stories about their adventures. Dexmore found himself listening intently, asking questions about things he had never considered before. What was it like to watch a young being grow and develop? Why did George seem so proud of achievements that had no military or economic value? Why do you care for them? Dexmore finally asked. George looked at him with surprise. "Because I love them. They're my family." The word love had no direct translation in Zephyrian language. Dexmore had heard humans use it, but he had assumed it was some kind of classification system. Now, seeing the expression on George's face, he realized it was something much more complex. Jake Martinez had been watching these changes in the aliens with growing interest. As part of the resistance movement, he was supposed to be looking for weaknesses to exploit. But what he was seeing was something entirely different. The Zephyrians weren't becoming weaker. They were becoming more human. Dr. Amanda Foster had joined the resistance after the aliens took over the hospital where she worked. As a psychiatrist, she was fascinated by the behavioral changes she observed in the occupying forces. During one of their secret meetings, she shared her observations with Jake and the others. They're showing signs of individual emotional development, she explained. 6 months ago, they moved and acted like a single organism. Now I'm seeing distinct personalities emerging. Some are curious, others seem anxious, and a few appear to be experiencing what I can only describe as depression. Sarah Thompson nodded in agreement. The medical staff I work with have noticed it too. The aliens are asking questions about human emotions, family relationships, and personal desires. Yesterday, one of them asked me what it felt like to miss someone. Rick Chun had discovered something even more significant while working on the alien computer systems. Their connection to their home planet is weakening. I can see it in their communication logs. The signals are becoming less frequent, and when they do connect, the conversations are shorter and more confused. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What does that mean? I think it means they're becoming individuals instead of part of a collective mind, Rick said. And they have no idea how to handle it. The proof of this theory came during a routine supply delivery to the Zephyrian base. Jake was part of the human work crew that unloaded the alien transport ships, and he noticed that the Zephyrian workers were beginning to show preferences for certain tasks. One alien, who had always been assigned to heavy lifting, kept looking toward the group that was organizing supplies. When Jake offered to switch places with him, the alien's eyes lit up with something that looked like gratitude. You enjoy organizing? Jake asked. The alien, whose name was Quinder, nodded eagerly. The patterns are pleasing. Each item has its proper place, and when everything is arranged correctly, it creates harmony. Jake realized that Quinder was describing the same satisfaction that humans felt when completing a puzzle or organizing their homes. The alien was developing personal preferences, finding joy in activities that served no military purpose. But the most significant change was happening too. Commander Vexthil himself. During his weekly broadcasts, humans began to notice longer pauses in his speech, as if he was struggling to find the right words. His orders to his troops became less harsh, and he began to include phrases that seemed almost apologetic. The human population will continue to follow work assignments, he announced during one broadcast. Those who comply will be treated with respect. The phrase treated with respect was new. 6 months ago, Vexthil had spoken only of punishment and control. Now, he seemed to be grappling with concepts that his species had never considered. Before, Jake's daughter Lucy had been watching these changes with the clear eyes of a child. Dad, I don't think the aliens are bad people, she said one evening. I think they're just scared and confused. Jake looked at his daughter with amazement. What makes you say that? Remember when we moved here from Arizona? You were grumpy. For weeks, because everything was different. The aliens look the same way, like they don't know where they fit in anymore. Out of the mouths of babes, Jake thought. Lucy had identified something that the adult resistance members had missed. The Zephyrians weren't just occupying Earth. They were being changed by it. Their rigid, militaristic society had no tools for dealing with the complex emotions and individual desires. That human contact was awakening in them. The resistance had been planning sabotage operations and guerrilla attacks, but Jake was beginning to wonder if they had stumbled onto something much more powerful than violence. They had found a way to defeat the aliens without firing a shot by simply being human around them. As he tucked Lucy into bed that night, Jake thought about Emma Sullivan's drawing and George Patterson's tea, about Quinder's love of organization, and Vexmore's curiosity about family. The Zephyrians had come to Earth with advanced technology and overwhelming force, but they had encountered something they couldn't conquer, the human heart. The cracks were spreading through their armor, and Jake wondered how long it would be before the entire structure collapsed. The aliens had thought they were capturing a planet, but instead, they might have walked into a trap of their own making, a trap baited with kindness, curiosity, and the simple human desire to connect with others. The war for Earth was far from over, but Jake was starting to believe that humanity might win it in the most unexpected way possible. Sea Commander Vexthel stood in his command center, staring at reports that made no sense to him. His occupation force was falling apart, not from enemy attacks or sabotage, but from something far more dangerous. They were becoming individuals. The steady stream of data from his troops showed patterns that defied everything he understood about Zephyrian military doctrine. Sub-Commander Krixtal had missed 3 mandatory formation assemblies in the past week. When questioned, he had given an answer that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. I was helping the human child, Emma, with her mathematics studies. She struggles with numerical concepts, and I found the teaching process rewarding. The word rewarding had no place in military vocabulary. Soldiers followed orders because it served the Empire, not because they found personal satisfaction in their duties. Yet Krixtal had used that word with genuine emotion in his voice, and Vexthel had felt something stir inside his own chest when he heard it. The breaking point came on a cold December morning in Chicago. A Zephyrian supply transport had been crossing Lake Michigan when its engines failed. The ship, carrying vital communication equipment and medical supplies, crashed into the icy water near the docks where Tony Ritchie worked. Tony had been unloading cargo containers when he heard the sound of metal tearing and engines screaming. He looked up to see the alien ship tilting sideways, its crystal hull cracking as it hit the water. Without thinking, he grabbed the emergency radio and called for the Coast Guard, then ran toward the dock where several small boats were moored. "Steve, Martinez, we got aliens in the water," Tony shouted to his coworkers. "Get the boat started." Jake Martinez, who had been working a shift at the docks, didn't hesitate. He jumped into one of the rescue boats with Tony and 2 other men. The water was freezing, and they could see pieces of the alien ship sinking beneath the surface. But they could also see Zephyrian soldiers struggling in the water, their heavy armor dragging them down. "There! I see one!" Steve Chun shouted, pointing to where Sub-Commander Krixtal was fighting to stay above the surface. Jake steered the boat toward the struggling alien. Krixtal's 4 arms were flailing wildly, and his large eyes were wide with panic. Jake had never seen a Zephyrian look frightened before, and something about the alien's terror touched something deep inside him. "Grab the rope," Jake called. Out, throwing a line toward Krixtal. The alien caught the rope with 2 of his arms, and Jake pulled him toward the boat. Tony and Steve helped drag Krixtal out of the water, and Jake immediately began checking for injuries. The alien's breathing was shallow, and his skin had turned a pale gray color. "He's going into shock," Jake said, remembering his medical training from the Marines. "We need to get him warm and get the water out of his lungs." Jake tilted Krixtal's head back and began performing CPR, pressing on the alien's chest and then shins. Same rhythm he would use for a human. At first, nothing happened, but then Krixtal coughed up lake water and began breathing more steadily. "That's it, buddy," Jake said softly. "You're going to be okay." Krixtal's eyes opened, and he looked up at Jake with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Why?" he whispered in his own language, then switched to English. "Why did you save me?" Jake looked down at the alien soldier, this being who was part of the force that had conquered his world, and found himself giving the only answer that made sense. "Because you needed help." The rescue was witnessed by dozens of Zephyrian soldiers who had come to investigate the crash. They stood on the shoreline, watching as human dock workers pulled their comrades from the freezing water and performed life-saving procedures. Several aliens had to be helped by humans, and in each case, the humans worked without hesitation or expectation of reward. Lieutenant Zach Zorn, a young Zephyrian officer, watched as Sarah Thompson treated an injured alien soldier. she worked with, the same care and attention she would have given to a human patient, bandaging wounds and checking for signs of internal injury. Why do they help us? Zaxorn asked Crixtal later, as they stood in the human medical facility where they had been taken for treatment. Crixtal was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Jake's face as he had performed CPR, about the gentle way Sarah had treated. They're wounded, about the simple matter-of-fact way the humans had risked their lives to save their enemies. I think, Crixtal said slowly, they help us because they see us as living beings, not as enemies. They respond to suffering, regardless of who is suffering. This concept was revolutionary for the Zephyrians. Their society was built on the principle of collective benefit. Actions were taken to serve the Empire, not to help individuals. The idea that beings would risk their lives to save strangers, even enemy strangers, was completely foreign to their understanding. But the effects of the rescue spread through the Zephyrian ranks like ripples in a pond. Soldiers began to question their orders in ways they never had before. If humans could show compassion to their enemies, what did that say about the nature of the occupation itself? Dr. Amanda Foster had been studying the psychological changes in the Zephyrians for months, and the rescue incident provided her with a breakthrough. She arranged a secret meeting with Crixtal, who had been quietly seeking her out for weeks. I need to understand what is happening to me, Crixtal told her, his voice filled with confusion and fear. I think about things that have no military value. I worry about the human child Emma when I do not see her for several days. I find myself wanting to create beautiful things instead of destroying them. Amanda listened carefully, recognizing the symptoms of someone discovering their own individuality for the first time. You're becoming a person, not just a soldier, she explained. You're developing emotions, preferences, and personal relationships. But this is wrong, Crixtal said. Zephyrians do not have personal desires. We serve the collective good. Maybe that's the problem, Amanda said gently. Maybe your species never learned that individual fulfillment and collective good don't have to be opposites. Meanwhile, Jake Martinez had been meeting with the resistance leaders, sharing what he had learned about the changes in the alien forces. Captain Ben Torres, who led their cell, was initially skeptical. You're saying we should befriend them instead of fighting them? Ben asked. I'm saying we might not need to fight them at all, Jake replied. They're changing on their own. Question is whether we can help that process along. Rick Chun had been monitoring Zephyrian communications, and his reports supported Jake's theory. Their messages back to their home planet are becoming less frequent and more confused. Yesterday, I intercepted a transmission where Commander Vex Thill was trying to explain why his soldiers were requesting art supplies and music recordings. The Resistance decided to conduct an experiment. Instead of planning sabotage operations, they would increase their efforts to interact positively with the Zephyrian forces. They would share food, offer help, and treat the aliens as individuals, rather than as an occupying army. The results were dramatic. Within weeks, Zephyrian soldiers began seeking out human contact. They would linger in areas where humans worked, asking questions about families, hobbies, and personal dreams. Some began to express preferences for certain duties, while others requested time off to explore human culture. Lucy Martinez had become friends with several young Zephyrian soldiers, teaching them games and showing them how to draw. One evening, she came home with a gift, a small crystal sculpture that one of the aliens had made for her. His name is Yextel, she told her father. He made this for me because I taught him how to play hopscotch. He said it was the first time he ever made something, just because he wanted to. Jake looked at the crystal sculpture, which depicted a human child and a Zephyrian soldier playing together. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, but more importantly, it represented something that should have been impossible, a Zephyrian creating. Art for its own sake. As a gift for a friend, Commander Vexthil was receiving increasingly desperate messages from the Zephyrian High Command. His superiors wanted to know why his reports were so irregular, why his soldiers were requesting unusual supplies, and why the human population hadn't been fully integrated into the Empire's labor system. Vexthil found himself unable to provide satisfactory answers. How could he explain that his soldiers were becoming individuals? How could he describe the way humans had responded to their presence, not with hatred or fear, but with curiosity and compassion? The truth was that Vexthul himself was changing. He had begun to have dreams, something that Zephyrians rarely experienced. In these dreams, he saw the cities his fleet had destroyed during the initial invasion, and he felt something he had never felt before: guilt. The humans had shown his soldiers that there was another way to live, and now the entire foundation of Zephyrian society was beginning to crumble. The Empire was built on the principle that individual desires were selfish and destructive, but the humans had proven that individual compassion could create something beautiful and powerful. As Vexthil stood in his command center, watching his soldiers interact with humans on the security monitors, he realized that the occupation had become something entirely different than what was planned. The Zephyrians hadn't conquered Earth. They had been conquered by it, not through force, but through something far. The message from the Zephyrian High Command arrived at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning, and Rick Chun was the first human to intercept it. He had been monitoring alien communications for months, but this transmission was different. It was marked with the highest priority codes, and it was addressed not just to Commander Vexthil, but to the entire occupation force. Rick's hands shook as he decoded the message. The words were cold and final, written in the formal language that the Zephyrian military used for official orders. When he finished translating, he stared at the screen in horror. "Jake, you need to see this right now," he said into his radio. "Jake." Martinez arrived at the abandoned warehouse they used as a communication center within 20 minutes. Sarah Thompson and Dr. Amanda Foster were already there, along with several other resistance members. Rick's face was pale as he handed Jake the printed translation. "The High Command is abandoning the occupation force," Rick said. "They're writing off the entire army as contaminated by alien influence. In 3 weeks, a sterilization fleet will arrive to destroy Earth and everyone on it." Jake read the message twice, his military training helping him understand the tactical implications. "They're going to kill their own soldiers?" "It's worse than that," Rick said. "According to this, the contamination is spreading. Other Zephyrian military units across the galaxy are beginning to show signs of individual thinking. The High Command sees Earth as a disease that needs to be eliminated before it spreads further." Dr. Foster leaned forward, her expression grim. "They're afraid. For the first time in their history, the Zephyrian Empire is facing something they can't control. Their own soldiers developing free will. The implications were staggering. Not only was Earth facing complete annihilation, but the Zephyrian soldiers who had come to see Earth as home were about to be sacrificed by their own government. Many of these aliens had formed genuine friendships with humans, had learned to appreciate art and music, had discovered what it meant to care about individual lives. "We have to warn them," Jake said. "Vexthil and his people deserve to know what's coming." "Are you crazy?" Captain Ben Torres spoke up from the back of the room. "They're still the enemy. This is our chance to get rid of them." "They're not the enemy anymore," Jake said firmly. "Crickstal saved my daughter from a building collapse last week. Dexmore has been teaching English to refugee children. These aliens aren't invaders anymore. They're neighbors." The debate continued for hours, but Jake's position gradually won support. The resistance had seen the changes in the Zephyrian forces firsthand. These weren't the cold, efficient soldiers who had conquered Earth 18 months ago. They were individuals who had discovered friendship, creativity, and compassion. The decision was made to approach Commander Vexthul directly. Jake volunteered to make the contact, despite the enormous risk involved. If Vexthul chose to see the meeting as a trap, Jake would likely be killed. But if he could convince the alien commander to listen, they might have a chance to save both species. The meeting took place in the ruins of Detroit's old train station, a building that had been damaged during the initial invasion. Jake arrived first, accompanied only by Dr. Foster and Sarah Thompson. They waited in the shadows of the broken columns, listening to the wind whistle through the shattered windows. Commander Vexthul arrived exactly on time. As Jake had expected, the alien leader was taller than Jake remembered, his crystalline armor reflecting the pale moonlight. But there was something different about his posture, something less rigid and threatening than before. "You requested this meeting," Vexthul said in his deep, measured voice. "Speak." Jake stepped forward, holding the translated message in his hands. "Your high command has abandoned you. All of you. In 3 weeks, they're sending a sterilization fleet to destroy Earth and everyone on it." Vexthul's large eyes fixed on the document as Jake handed it to him. The alien commander read silently, his expression becoming more troubled with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Jake with something that might have been sadness. "You could have kept this information secret," Vexthul said. "You could have allowed the fleet to destroy us and reclaim your world. Why do you warn me?" Jake thought about all the changes he had witnessed over the past months. He thought about Crickstal playing with the children in Central Park, about Thexmore's weekly tea visits with old George Patterson, about the crystal sculpture that Lucy kept on her bedside table. "Because you're not our enemies anymore," Jake said simply. "You're our friends." The word friends seemed to hit Vexthul like a physical blow. He stepped back, his forearms trembling slightly. "Friends," he repeated, as if testing the word in his mouth. "I have learned this concept from your species. It is powerful." Dr. Foster stepped forward. "Commander, what's happening to your people isn't contamination. It's liberation. You're discovering what it means to be individuals instead of just parts of a machine." Vexthul was quiet for a long moment, staring at the broken walls around them. "My species has conquered 17 worlds," he said finally. "We believed that individual desires were weakness, that only collective action could create true strength. But here, on your world, I have seen something different." "What have you seen?" Sarah asked gently. "I have seen a human child share her food with a hungry alien soldier. I have seen your people risk their lives to save enemies who had just been shooting at them. I have seen my own soldiers create art, form friendships, and weep when they are separated from human companions." Vexthul's voice grew stronger. "I have seen that individual compassion can create something more powerful than any military force." Jake felt a surge of hope. "Will you help us fight the sterilization fleet?" "I will do more than that," Vexthul said. "I will give you something that no conquered world has ever possessed, the loyalty of a Zephyrian commander who has learned to choose his own path." The alliance that formed over the next few days was unlike anything in galactic history. Zephyrian soldiers worked alongside human engineers to prepare Earth's defenses. Alien technology was combined with human ingenuity to create weapons and shields that neither species could have developed alone. But the most powerful weapon they possessed was something intangible, the knowledge that they were fighting for. Something worth preserving. The Zephyrians weren't just defending their new home. They were defending their right to be individuals, to make their own choices, to love and be loved in return. Crickstal had been one of the first to volunteer for the Defense Force. "I cannot return to what I was before," he told Jake. Emma taught. me how to see beauty in simple things. George showed me what it means to care for others without expecting anything in return. If I must die to protect this world, I will do so gladly. Similar conversations were happening throughout the combined forces. Zephyrian soldiers spoke of human friends who had changed their understanding of life itself. Humans described alien companions who had shown them new ways of thinking and creating. Sarah Thompson found herself working with Zephyrian medical officers to develop new treatments that combined human medical knowledge with alien technology. The cooperation between the two species had created something neither could have achieved alone. Tony Ritchie, who had helped rescue the aliens from Lake Michigan, was now working with Zephyrian engineers to modify Earth's defense systems. The aliens had provided advanced shield technology, while the humans contributed their understanding of guerrilla tactics and improvised weapons. But perhaps the most important development was the message that Vexthul decided to send to the approaching sterilization fleet. Instead of military communications or surrender negotiations, he chose to broadcast something that had never been sent between Zephyrian forces before, a personal message about individual choice and the value of friendship. My fellow Zephyrians, Vexthul's voice carried across space toward the incoming fleet. I speak to you not as your commander, but as an individual who has discovered something our species never knew existed. I have learned that strength comes not from following orders without question, but from choosing to protect those we care about. The message included recordings of daily life on Earth, humans and Zephyrians working together, playing together, and caring for each other. It showed children of both species learning from each other, and soldiers who had once been enemies now fighting side by side to defend their shared home. We are not contaminated, Vexthul continued. We are free, and freedom is not something that can be destroyed by weapons or fear. It lives in the heart of every being who chooses to care for others, to create beauty, and to hope for a better future. The broadcast was sent continuously for 3 days before the sterilization fleet arrived. Jake wondered if anyone in the approaching ships would listen, or if they would simply follow their orders to destroy everything on Earth. The fate of two species would be decided by whether the concept of individual choice could spread faster than the Empire's ability to suppress it. As the alien fleet took position around Earth, Jake stood with Lucy on the roof of their apartment building, watching the stars. The girl who had once been afraid of the occupation was now helping to coordinate refugee shelters for both humans and Zephyrians who might be displaced by the coming battle. Dad, do you think we'll win? Lucy asked. The sterilization fleet arrived at dawn, filling the sky with ships that were 3 times larger than the original invasion force. Jake Martinez stood on the command deck of the defense station that humans and Zephyrians had built together, watching the massive vessels take position around Earth like hungry vultures circling their prey. Commander Vexthul stood beside him, no longer the cold military leader who had conquered Earth 2 years ago. The alien's posture was relaxed, almost human in its casualness, and his large eyes held an expression that Jake had learned to recognize as determination mixed with hope. They have enough firepower to turn this planet into dust, Vexthul said, quietly studying the tactical displays. But they also have something they did not expect to face, soldiers who understand what they are fighting for. The combined defense force was an impossible sight. Human fighters flew alongside Zephyrian interceptors, their pilots communicating in a mixture of languages that had become natural over the past months. On the ground, alien soldiers and human resistance fighters worked together to prepare the shield generators that would protect Earth's major cities. Sarah Thompson was running the medical stations, treating both species with equal care. Her staff included Zephyrian healers who had learned human techniques and human doctors who had mastered alien medical technology. The sight of the two species working together to save lives had become so normal that Jake sometimes forgot how miraculous it would have seemed just a year ago. The first communication from the sterilization fleet came exactly at noon. The voice belonged to Admiral Krenvox, a Zephyrian commander whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was known throughout the galaxy. "Commander Vextul, you and your contaminated forces will surrender immediately," the Admiral's voice boomed. "Across all frequencies. The planet Earth and all life upon it will be sterilized to prevent further spread of the infection. You have 1 hour to comply." Vextul activated the response channel, his voice steady and calm. "Admiral, I invite you to land on the surface and see what we have built here. Your soldiers are not contaminated. They are free. And freedom is not something that can be destroyed by weapons." "You have been infected by alien influence," Krenvox replied. "Your individual desires have made you weak and unreliable. The Empire cannot allow this infection to spread." Jake listened to the exchange and felt a familiar chill of fear. The Admiral spoke with the same cold certainty that Vexthul had possessed when he first arrived on Earth. But Jake also noticed something else. Some of the other voices in the fleet's communications didn't sound quite as certain. Rick Chun, who was monitoring all alien transmissions, brought Jake a report that made his heart race. "I'm picking up internal communications from the fleet," Rick said. "Some of the ship commanders are asking questions about the mission. They want to know why they're being ordered to destroy their own soldiers." Dr. Amanda Foster had been working with Krikstal and other defected Zephyrians to prepare something unprecedented, a psychological weapon that had never been used in warfare before. Instead of trying to hurt or confuse the enemy, they were going to try to help them understand what they were fighting against. "We've prepared a broadcast that will show them what life is like here," Dr. Foster explained. "Not military propaganda, but simple recordings of daily life. Humans and Zephyrians living together, working together, caring for each other." The broadcast began just as the sterilization fleet moved into attack position. But instead of military communications or surrender demands, they transmitted something that had never been sent between military forces before. The sound of children laughing. The recording showed Emma Sullivan, now 9 years old, teaching a group of young Zephyrian soldiers how to play hopscotch. It showed George Patterson sharing tea with Thexmore while they discussed their favorite books. It showed human and alien workers collaborating on art projects, building playgrounds for their children, and helping each other during difficult times. Most importantly, it showed Zephyrian soldiers who had learned to smile. The effect on the sterilization fleet was immediate and dramatic. Jake watched the tactical displays as several ships began to slow down, their weapon systems powering down. On the communication channels, he could hear confusion and uncertainty creeping into the voices of the alien commanders. "What kind of contamination makes soldiers happy?" One ship captain asked his superior. "I have never seen Zephyrians behave this way," another voice said. "They appear to be content." Admiral Krenvox tried to maintain control, ordering his ships to begin the bombardment immediately. But something unexpected happened. Some of his commanders began to refuse orders. "Admiral, I request permission to land and investigate the situation personally," Captain Yildar announced over the open channel. "These soldiers do not appear to be suffering from contamination. They appear to be thriving." "You will follow orders without question," Krenvox replied angrily. "Individual investigation is not permitted." "But Admiral, if individual investigation is not permitted, how do we know that our orders are correct?" another captain asked. Jake realized that the question itself was revolutionary. A Zephyrian soldier had just questioned the wisdom of blind obedience, and he had done it publicly, in front of the entire fleet. The infection of individual thinking was spreading faster than the Empire could contain it. the breaking point came when Sub-Commander Cricksdale, who had been monitoring the fleet communications, made a decision that changed everything. He opened a channel to the entire sterilization fleet and began to speak, not as a military officer, but as an individual sharing his personal experience. "My fellow Zephyrians," Cricksdale's voice carried across space, "I am the soldier who was rescued from Lake Michigan by human dock workers. I am the one who learned to create art instead of destroying it. I am the one who discovered that friendship is stronger than fear." He paused, then continued with words that Jake knew would echo throughout the galaxy. "I have learned that we are not contaminated. We are awakened. And I would rather die protecting this awakening than live as a slave." To the collective, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the sterilization fleet, soldiers began to openly question their orders. Some ship commanders announced that they were defecting to join the Earth Defense Force. Others requested permission to land and see for themselves what had happened to their comrades. Admiral Krunvox, faced with a mutiny that was spreading through his entire fleet, made a desperate decision. He ordered the ships still under his control to begin bombing Earth immediately, hoping to destroy the source of the infection before it could spread further. But the battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Zephyrian ships fought against other Zephyrian ships, with former comrades choosing different sides based on their individual beliefs about freedom and choice. Human and alien pilots flew together, protecting their shared home from forces that would destroy it. The fighting lasted for 6 days, but the outcome was decided by something more powerful than weapons or tactics. It was decided by the simple fact that soldiers who were fighting for something they believed in were stronger than soldiers who were merely following orders. On the 7th day, Admiral Krunvox surrendered. His fleet had been reduced to less than a third of its original size, and most of his remaining commanders had defected to the Earth Alliance. The few ships that remained loyal to the Empire were allowed to return to the Zephyrian homeworld, carrying with them news of what had happened to Dot. Jake stood with Vexthul and Lucy on the observation deck of the defense station, watching as the last of the hostile ships disappeared into hyperspace. Below them, human and Zephyrian families were already beginning to rebuild the areas that had been damaged in the fighting. "What happens now?" Lucy asked, holding the hand of her Zephyrian friend Yextel. Vexthul smiled, an expression that would have been impossible for him before coming to Earth. "Now we build something new. A society where individuals can choose their own path, where friendship is more important than conquest, and where the differences between species become sources of strength rather than division." The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. The galaxy had been changed by what happened on Earth, and the ripples of that change would spread to every corner of the Empire. The Zephyrians had come to conquer humanity, but instead they had been conquered by something far more powerful: the irresistible human capacity for love, growth, and hope. As Jake watched human and alien children playing together in the fading light, he knew that the universe would never be the same. The greatest victory in human history had been won not through superior weapons or military strategy, but through the simple act of refusing to give up their humanity in the face of overwhelming odds. The aliens had thought they were trapping humanity on Earth, but instead they had become trapped by Earth's greatest gift, the knowledge that freedom, friendship, and individual choice were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost.